Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. For those who don't know me, I'm Stephanie Sandella. I am Program and Outreach Specialist here at Library Link, New Jersey. We are so thrilled for this conversation. So we have Samantha Oakley, Project Director of the American Library Association, Kaileen McGourty, Program Coordinator of the American Library Association, and Courtney Brees, Executive Director of the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. And would you like to introduce yourselves a little bit more to go ahead and get started? Courtney, do you want to go first?
Actually, I think I'm going to let Samantha get us started. She can introduce herself and I will say a little bit more about myself and our organization in a little bit.
Sounds great.
Great, yeah. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Samantha Oakley. I'm a project director with ALA's Public Programs Office. And joining me today that you'll hear from, and I'll let her introduce herself a little bit more later, is Kaileen McGourty, who is also from the American Library Association with me. So we are so pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you all today about community-led conversations. Let me see if there that goes. Many of you may already be familiar with the American Library Association, which is a national professional organization for librarians and information professionals. My department within ALA is the Public Programs Office. We work to empower libraries to create vibrant hubs of learning, conversation, and connection in communities. We do this by providing grants, exhibits, professional development opportunities, and resources to libraries of all types through our grant-funded projects and also our website, programminglibrarian.org. So before we dive into talking about library-led conversations, we really need to define how this fits within the community engagement work that many libraries are doing across the country. And what we mean by community engagement is the process of working collaboratively with individuals, be they library customers, residents, faculty, students, or partner organizations, to address public concerns for the betterment of the community. Increasingly, libraries offer patrons a welcoming space to meet their neighbors to discuss and explore issues of importance to them. In this sense, as part of their community engagement work, many libraries are taking on the role of facilitating dialogues within their communities on important issues or topics. Discussions libraries have led range widely, anywhere from large national issues like healthcare to very hyper-local issues, such as how to improve the water quality of Lake Champlain. Within this falls our office's work with the Libraries Transforming Communities Initiative, or LTC for short. LTC was developed due to a growing call from library workers for resources and professional development opportunities to learn how to do this work. Launched in 2014, LTC aims to strengthen libraries' roles as core community leaders and change agents by developing and distributing new tools, resources, and support for librarians to engage with their communities in new ways. Through this project, we hope to shift public discourse away from themes about libraries in crisis or being antique institutions toward talk of libraries as agents of positive community change and discussion. This shift in public perception can often lead to the question of why libraries for this work. The answer is because even during this challenging time, and especially during this time, libraries are called upon to serve the community in new and important ways. I think ALA's executive director, Tracy Hall, expressed it best when she said that it is our job to ensure that all users have access to an array of arguments, sometimes competing arguments, so they can make their own decisions about the world and their place in it. Often, especially today, in our increasingly siloed, echo-chambered society, that means libraries must curate and host conversations themselves. Conversations are an exchange of ideas, and the library is a natural home for that. In fact, your local library is almost certainly already leading conversations. This may be through a variety of means, whether it's through hosting community reads, book clubs, panel discussions, the list goes on. So we support libraries in doing this work through providing them with various resources through LTC, which I'll briefly talk about now. First up, we provide monetary support through grant opportunities. Our most recent opportunity provided $3,000 to approximately 600 libraries to lead conversations on topics of importance to their community. And in November of 2022, which is less than a month away at this point, which is shocking, we will be launching another LTC grant opportunity. This opportunity will offer more than $7 million in grants to small and rural libraries to lead conversations with the goal of finding out how they can increase the accessibility of their facilities, services, and programs to better serve people with disabilities. More information about this opportunity can be found on ala.org/LTC access, which is displayed on the screen there. So we also provide a plethora of free professional development resources under LTC to support this work. This includes things like basic facilitation guide, an asynchronous e-course on how to lead community conversations, examples of dialogue and deliberation models that work well for different library types and community sizes, and much, much more. These resources are all available for free on ala.org/LTC and were put together in collaboration with the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. In a moment, I'll pass things over to Courtney, who will share more information about these specific tools and our work together. But before I do, I have one final resource I wanted to quickly mention, which is programminglibrarian.org. The website was built by the Public Programs Office to help facilitate connections and peer-to-peer sharing among programming librarians. As such, it contains articles, blogs, program models, etc., all written by library workers from all types of libraries across the country. It's a really great resource for seeing examples of what libraries are doing and for hearing about new grant opportunities from ALA like the one I just mentioned. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Courtney.
Thanks, Samantha. Hey, everybody. My name is Courtney Brees. I am the Executive Director for the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. We love to refer to ourselves as NCDD. It's a little easier to say. NCDD is a network of folks who do the work we broadly define as dialogue and deliberation. And I just thought briefly I'd explain what we mean by that. Samantha just talked about community conversations, which is a very lovely term to use. And we started as a practitioner organization. And so we use the terms dialogue and deliberation, which are basically two different approaches to those community conversations. Dialogue being conversations that really focus on listening and being able to explore topics and hear one another. Deliberation focused a little bit more on that kind of decision making, weighing options, and really deciding what we want to do. So the folks in our network are doing that work in a variety of settings, including libraries, as well as through government, through higher education, nonprofit work, even working with businesses, really all over the place. And we come together in our NCDD network to share resources with one another, learn from one another, gather together. We do webinars like this one and others as well. So we are just a really great place for folks to come together who want to learn more about these kinds of practices and meet others who are interested in this work. And so we've had the joy of working with the American Library Association's Public Programs Office on the Libraries Transforming Communities initiative for about the last 6 years or so in various ways. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit of what we've been doing together, what is available to you all already, and also share with you some of what libraries that we've been working with have been focusing on. And then we'll get a little further into the details beyond that. Next slide. Excellent. So as I mentioned, we have been supporting the LTC effort for quite a while now, and we've done that in a variety of ways. So the facilitation guide that Samantha mentioned earlier and is available on the LTC site is something that we helped to create. And it's really kind of your quick handy guide to how to plan for and facilitate community conversations. So really great resource to you as you're exploring, looking for some guidance in terms of how do I go about doing this. To complement that, we also created an e-course that's available on the LTC site. And that will walk you through in modules a lot of the content in the guide. But because it's a course, it includes some exercises, some examples, some further information beyond just what's in the guide. So really great resource if you're looking to further your skills and understanding of how to plan for your community conversations, how to facilitate those conversations. And we even added a module about how to do that in a virtual setting during the pandemic, as it became ever more relevant than any of us had anticipated it would. In addition to that, excuse me, we have also offered various webinars over the years. Those have included webinars that have featured specific models for conversations, and I'll talk about that briefly in a moment, as well as more kind of overview webinars about dialogue and deliberation, kind of giving you a better understanding of the realm, what's out there, and what libraries can do in terms of community conversations. Again, those are all available up on the LTC site. And then beyond that, we've also had the opportunity to provide coaching support, most recently to some of the grantees that we have worked with, the 600 grantees that Samantha mentioned. We had an opportunity to coach some of them through their process. So as they planned for their community conversation, we kind of worked with them to prepare for that. They had an opportunity to talk with our coaches as well as talk with one another and really support each other as they went through and held those community conversations, and then got a chance to kind of share with one another how that went for them and so on. So it's been really great to see all of the awesome work that libraries have been doing. Next slide. Excellent. So a moment ago, I mentioned different models for conversation, and I just briefly wanted to touch on these for you all. In the first iteration of LTC that NCDD was involved in, sorry, lots of acronyms there, we introduced folks to different models for community conversations. And so what you see here is the list of models that we shared. So on the LTC site, there are webinars that introduce you to each of these models. And I share this in case this is of interest, if you want to kind of see what some different models look like and how they may be used or how they have been used by libraries. Those webinars are a really great opportunity. The LTC site also has different resources and materials that we've curated for the libraries with regards to these different models. And so amongst these, I'll just talk briefly about them. We have a variety of different kinds of models that get at, like I said before, the kind of dialogic side of things, giving people a chance to connect and listen to one another, as well as the deliberative side of things, giving people a chance to really look at options and make decisions together. So for instance, Conversation Cafe at the top of the list there is a very dialogic conversation model. It's something that's very simple and easy to pick up. The materials, all basically fit onto one sheet of paper that tells you what it's all about, how it works. And it's something that can be easily incorporated into existing opportunities, whether that's a book club, whether that's another event, maybe a panel event. You want to have folks have a chance to talk about the topic afterwards. It's a great model for that. Similarly, in terms of dialogue, further down the list, we have reflective structured dialogue, which is from an organization called Essential Partners. And theirs is focused more on creating connection. So it's really from a conflict transformation background. And the idea is to give people a chance to talk to one another who might otherwise be kind of in opposing camps, if you will. So giving folks a chance to talk and to listen to one another and find kind of that shared humanity. It's really lovely for that, but a little more specific in terms of opportunities that might be fitting for it. Otherwise, we also have some other great approaches here. Everyday Democracy's Dialogue to Change approach is very much a collaborative kind of conversation model that brings people together to go, okay, what do we want to do in this community and how do we do it? What are our roles that each of us can play in making that happen? Future Search kind of similarly asks folks to think more about where we want to go. And creates an opportunity for folks to really start to narrow down those approaches and find that path forward. national issues forums and again in the decision-making realm is really asking folks to weigh options when they think about a issue. They are, as the name suggests, oftentimes they have materials that are framed around big national topics. So climate change, money in politics, and so on, are materials that are already produced by them and available to use. They're actually really great for like educational types of conversations where you want to give folks a chance to dig into really the complexities of some of these issues that we're talking about, you know, in the public eye, in the news, in our politics and so on. And last but not least, World Cafe, which is a great primarily dialogic model, but can kind of go into the realm of deliberation, bringing people together to have a chance to really mix and mingle in different rounds of conversation, with the idea of letting folks explore a topic, brainstorm ideas, look at what's possible, and so on. So more information about all of these models is available again on the LTC site. Next slide. Okay, so what it all really boils down to is skills that libraries have learned through the LTC initiatives. So that has included things like developing partnerships. So thinking about, in order to hold community conversations, you want to get a broad swath of the community involved. Who in the community can you work with? Who can you partner with to kind of help make that happen? That goes to how you ultimately frame the conversation, but also how to help get folks in the room. So we've talked about a bit about how to identify those partners, how to reach out, and how to develop a good partnership that can support those initiatives. I just mentioned framing. So we've also talked about identifying a topic for conversation. So, you know, what is it that your community needs or wants to talk about? And how do you frame it? So how do you present that topic in a way that doesn't already include a presumed outcome or a potential bias, so that folks can hear the topic and go, ooh, okay, that's something that I'd love to lend my perspective or my experience to and be a part of that conversation, versus feeling like, oh, well, they've already clearly decided what they want to do. And so maybe I won't participate. So really framing helps to make sure that you can get folks with various perspectives to participate and to really see themselves as welcomed in that conversation. Marketing and communications skills really go to that aspect of how you share with folks the opportunity. What are you asking folks to do? And, you know, why should they participate? Why, you know, what's in it for them, if you will. And that helps you to, of course, get your folks in the room so you can have a good conversation with a good group of folks. Designing the community conversations themselves. So we've done a lot of work with libraries on thinking about what are the questions you're going to ask in your community conversation? Because really what it boils down to is you're bringing folks together with a topic in mind. So what is it you're asking them to talk about? What are those questions that are going to help prompt that conversation? So we've worked to help them devise those series of questions to help them work through the conversation to get at the ultimate goals that they have in mind. And then, of course, facilitation skills themselves. So library staff can facilitate these conversations. There's also times where folks at libraries feel like having someone else come in and work with them is, you know, more advantageous for various reasons. And I think we'll hear a little bit about that soon. But at its core, facilitation skills is a skill that can transfer, you know, to many different aspects of your work, you know, meeting management, as well as these community conversations, and really just thinking more about how we communicate with one another. So we've been able to help develop those skills in library workers as we've worked together over the years. Next slide. Okay, so I've shared a bit about what we've been helping libraries to learn and to develop. So now I want to start sharing a little bit about what the libraries we've worked with have been doing. So these are some of the conversation topics that library staff have convened community conversations around. This is not a full list by any means. This is just a list of some of the folks, specifically those that we've worked with over the last year or so, some of the topics that they have convened conversations around. So mental health, we've worked with libraries who have seen an opportunity to bring members of the community together to talk about mental health issues, talk about ways to support one another in the community, especially those who might be struggling with mental health issues, and have an opportunity to really talk about, what's possible. Others have convened conversations around voting. So I know one library, for instance, at least one library, held a conversation following reading a book that was around the topic of voting. And so they used the book as a way to open up conversation around issues with voting, very timely as of right now. That's been something that's been in the public eye. And so that was their way in to bringing people together to talk more on that subject. Others have convened conversations around racial justice issues in their community or in the broader community. Issues like food access. So some libraries who are in food deserts have brought the community together to talk about what is it that we can do to address this. Are there possibilities out there, and so on and so forth. Encouraging student reading. Libraries were thinking about how to encourage those students to continue reading over the summer months. And so in preparation for that, held a community conversation to talk more about how to encourage the students to continue reading. Some folks have convened conversations around supporting the LGBTQ+ community in their area. Others have talked about uses of public spaces, things like parks. So, how do we want to make use of those spaces? What are some of the needs we have for those spaces? And how might we, help to bring that to fruition? So that can be a conversation that also kind of couples with partnering with, the local government, for instance. And then one other example, one of the libraries we worked with in the last year was specifically reaching out to connect with homeschooling families and create some more connections to the library. So bringing folks together to hear some more about what they might have needed in terms of support, ways the library could support them, and things of that sort. So lots of possibilities for how community conversations can be utilized by the libraries. Next slide. Okay. And finally, this is just a few of the goals that libraries have shared with us in terms of holding their community conversations. Just meant to give you an idea of kind of, why libraries may ultimately choose to use conversations in their work. So for some, it was about having an opportunity to connect underserved communities to the library's services. So by holding a community conversation, they could welcome those folks into the library, give them a chance to hear some of what the library can offer them. And so that was a great way for them to do that, to kind of approach them and ask them to share their experiences, their thoughts, their ideas. Others have used community conversations as a means to get community input that would help inform strategic planning. So as a library goes into its strategic planning process, getting a chance to hear from the community about what their priorities may be, what they could most use from the library, what's been most useful amongst the library's services or programs, can help them as they move into that process and keep in mind what they're hearing from the public. Others have used this, really kind of in the way that we've been talking about, just to engage community members on issues of importance to their community. So that can be anything and everything under the sun just about, but really recognizing that there's a need amongst the community for conversation on certain topics or certain issues. And so using conversation as a means to bring folks together to really tackle that. Others have set a goal of creating space for members of the community who may need support or may need connection. So I know one library convened a conversation amongst caregivers, folks who were taking care of those either, elders, those with disabilities, others needing different support. And so they created a community conversation really to create connections amongst those folks, so they could feel less alone, so they could feel more connected to one another. And so sometimes that's been the goal, is really to help just build those connections and support in the community. And finally, creating new opportunities for exploration and learning. So as I mentioned, conversations can be great for giving people a chance to explore a topic, to learn from one another, to learn to kind of listen and hear one another in new ways. And so community conversations have been a new way for the library to help folks to do that. Whether it's part of a book club, whether it's part of existing programming, or its own new opportunity to bring together folks in the community. That's been one of the goals for these community conversations. So with that, I am going to hand things over to our third speaker, Kaileen, who's going to drill down even a little bit deeper to share some examples of what this has looked like.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Kaileen, and like it was mentioned, I am also on the Public Programs Office team at ALA. So just to wrap up the presentation and allow you to see some of what we've talked about put into practice, I wanted to give a few examples of community conversations we've seen libraries lead using these resources. Next slide. Perfect, thank you. So first up is an example from Owl's Head, Maine, a tiny volunteer library that operates on a $1,000 annual budget. Until last year, the library was solely for borrowing and had never hosted a community event. Diane Nelson, the vice president and secretary of the library, wanted to host a virtual event to start conversations about what had become a controversial local topic. The local library had proposed an expansion, and it was up for vote by the town. There were lots of misinformation floating around, and residents were very upset about a rumor that the change would bring in large passenger jets. So Nelson and the library board hosted a 90-minute Zoom forum in which leaders from the town, county, and airport responded to residents' questions. The town vote was postponed until after the conversation. And in this case, Diane made the choice to hire a professional moderator. She said for most other topics, she would have led the conversation herself, but she knew it was critical for the library to be objective, and having a third-party facilitator helped with that. In the end, 140 people attended the forum, and afterward, voters overwhelmingly voted against the expansion. Next slide. You may remember the huge winter storm that hit Texas in February 2021. Pottsboro, Texas lost electricity for 4 days and water for 5, and there was a certain amount of chaos during that time. Unexpectedly, it was the library that rose to the occasion. They became a hub for distributing water to people who needed it. Hundreds of people would pull up to the building with containers to meet large trucks carrying well water. Afterwards, many residents were angry at the city for not responding quickly enough. The library was praised, though, so they were in a strong position to bring people together afterwards to talk about what had happened. Library Director Diane Connery hosted a conversation about how the community could be better prepared the next time there is an emergency. In that conversation, it was clear that residents wanted to be actively involved in any response. So, working with the county, the library offered a 9-week community emergency response team training at the library. Diane, of course, wanted her community to be prepared, but she said she also had strategic reasons for being involved. She brings up an important point. Strategically, one of the reasons we think it is important for the library to be involved in emergency preparedness and disaster response is to elevate our position and open new funding streams. Unfortunately, some stakeholders in government positions still believe the library is limited to checking out books and offering story times. Next slide. Lastly is an example from Parker Memorial Library in Sulphur, Oklahoma. Sulphur is home to the Oklahoma School for the Deaf, a public school for 2 to 18-year-old deaf and hard of hearing children. There are 105 students and 110 staff members. Despite having such a large deaf population, Jennifer Lindsay, the branch manager, realized that the library didn't deliberately include this community in library functions and other town events. OSD staff and the wider deaf community were invited to 2 community conversations with Jennifer and an ALS interpreter to discuss library services, programs, ASL fluency support, and more. These discussions led to changes in existing programs, like including ASL interpreters for all summer reading program performances, which drew in over 100 people each week. New programs were also developed, like a teen advisory group with both deaf and hearing teens, FEELS, a family engagement and early literacy support program for deaf babies and toddlers to experience story time, as well as OSD dorm visits. And accessibility requirements are now a part of all library services and programs. The work Jennifer has done following her receipt of the 2 rounds of LTC funding is changing the entire Sulphur community's perception of the library. Parker Memorial Library is now seen as a space for everyone, a central hub where residents of all shapes and sizes and abilities can come together and enjoy the programs and services the library has to offer. Next slide. So these are just a few examples of how libraries have utilized the community engagement resources to connect with their community and elevate the position of the library. For more examples, as we mentioned, you can read the case studies on programminglibrarian.org and on our LTC website. And additionally, you can please visit the ala.org/LTC access or scan the QR code there on the screen to read more about our newest LTC accessible grant opportunity and stay up to date. Now we can open it up to any questions.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in a chat, or even just feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. So it's pretty informal. So yeah, feel free to share any thoughts, questions, comments. We'd be happy to hear from you.
I have a question about this upcoming grant. Is it has to be small and rural? Yeah, someone's asking the similar thing. So can you talk a little bit more about what small and rural means, or is it small or rural?
Yeah. So you're correct. It is small and rural. And how we define that is through the Institute of Museum and Library Services, how they define that. So it is, rural is defined as being located 5 or more miles from an urbanized area. And small is defined as being located in a town with 25,000 or less people. And if you're, because we do get this question a lot with, like, if you're part of a consortium or a county system, it's where your library is physically located. So multiple libraries within the consortium or county system can apply. They just can't be like located in like Chicago, but they can be located in like a small rural town in the county.
I like the question from Joan in the chat. That might be a question for Samantha or Kaileen, maybe. Would be, could the grant cover construction costs for making the library more accessible to the LGBTQ plus community? For example, gender neutral bathrooms. So do either of you have any knowledge or familiarity with grants being used for that purpose?
So this grant is specifically for increasing the accessibility for patrons with disabilities. So you could, a lot of people are suggest, or we're hearing a lot of people suggest modifying their bathrooms to make it accessible for like people with wheelchairs, things like that, that would be eligible. As part of that, if your target disabled community that you propose the project for also says that they want the bathroom to be gender neutral as part of that work, that's fine, but it can't just be for a project here specifically at the LGBTQ community without incorporating the disabled services lens.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying. I also like Pamela's comment in the chat of, do you know any examples where the conversation has concerned institutional racism and or DEI issues?
So I know, and Samantha and Kaileen, if you have specific examples, this has been I think, a common topic of interest to libraries as we've worked with them, especially in the last several years. What I can recall is several libraries have really used the conversations as an opportunity to really expose the community to a conversation around these kinds of topics. So what's coming to mind for me is I know at least one library who did a book club read using various books that shared different experiences of people of color, and used that as an opportunity to bring folks together for a conversation around those kinds of experiences, and sharing more about what that kind of brought up for folks in terms of thinking about their own community. So it was kind of a launching point to those conversations without necessarily digging into institutional racism in depth, but maybe kind of starting that. I think we've found in working with libraries who've been doing it for the first time, we've kind of encouraged them to start there versus diving too far into what's really a challenging subject, even for folks who have been doing this kind of work for a while. It needs to be handled with care. We don't want to cause any harm to anybody as we do that. So that's immediately what comes to my mind is folks have used conversations to kind of start giving people a space to explore these kinds of subjects. Certainly other folks who do this kind of work have been doing work in these spaces, and there are examples and resources out there more specifically around that. But that's what comes to my mind. And Samantha, Kaileen, if there's anything else that you can think of, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I agree with everything Courtney has said, and we have definitely seen a lot of libraries tackling a range of issues under that broad umbrella. So I know of one example of a library that specifically led a conversation about institutional racism and police violence because they were located in a community that was very close to where Breonna Taylor was murdered. So it was a very emotional issue for their community and something that was important that their community really wanted to discuss. And there's been other conversations around Indigenous rights and in particular land usage and other items like that that have been discussed in a lot of libraries. So a lot of the time the libraries rely on their communities to really shape the conversation and the direction it goes in. But I agree with Courtney that if you're brand new to this work and haven't done a conversation before, I would really encourage you to look into a facilitator with expertise in DEI issues specifically, just to make sure, as she was saying, you don't unintentionally cause more harm than good with a conversation, and also the way that conversations can go in those type of spaces is particularly in small and rural communities where a lot of the times it's predominantly white audiences, and so you don't want to be turning to the smaller marginalized communities to act as the sole educators for that community.
Thank you, Samantha. That was a really thoughtful answer too. I really appreciate that. So yeah, does anyone else have any questions? We're happy to stay around for a few more minutes. Yeah, feel free to answer or share any questions, comments. Okay, Courtney, I see you nodding in response to Ethan's comment. I'm not too familiar with Everyday Democracy's Dialogue to Change. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, so Ethan, thank you for mentioning that. I should have mentioned some specifics, but yes, Everyday Democracy's Dialogue to Change approach, which is one of the models that we have featured in the LTC work. And so there is a webinar available on the LTC site if you want to learn a little bit more about it. Their whole approach has a strong social justice lens. And so they have definitely done conversations that have related to racial justice and social justice issues. And basically their process and how they frame things has been built with that in mind. So it's very much about giving people, it's really about creating ownership amongst the community for what they're going to do. So it's to just briefly describe, if there is, a matter that needs discussing in the community, folks can come together and identify different strategies that they can take to address it. The example that comes to my mind is a conversation that did actually involve a library in Hartford, Connecticut. So bringing the community together with police and talking about safety issues. And so they had several approaches that they identified for being able to address the topic. And so folks came together in smaller groups to talk more about those. So for some, that was creating opportunities to bring police officers in the community together in, different kinds of environments. So bringing them together for community events, things of that sort, to create more connection, as well as other opportunities to discuss some of the challenges that had existed in the past, things of that sort. So it is a process that is very mindful of these kinds of dynamics that we've been talking about just now, and is kind of built for those kinds of conversations. And I should also just mention, there are many others out there as well. We've just specifically touched upon a small subset of models in our work with libraries, kind of keeping in mind what felt approachable and useful to folks who are just starting out. There are a lot more out there, and I'll share a link in a moment, but NCDD has developed a resource we call the Engagement Streams Framework, which kind of outlines the 4 overarching goals of dialogue and deliberation. And I've kind of mentioned those in some of my talking points. So bringing people together to explore something, to find ways to work towards collaborative actions we can take, decision-making, and conflict transformation. And within that, we have different types of conversation models that exist that serve those purposes. So that's like, if you want to dig deeper and see what else is out there, that's one resource that's available to you. And I'll drop that link in the chat in just a moment.
Yeah, Courtney, I appreciate you speaking about that too. And I'm also looking at Nancy's comment about working with the Harwood Institute, I'm not too familiar with. Nancy, do you have personal experience working with them? Or would you be happy to share?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah, ALA has partnered with the Harwood Institute for years. They trained over 5,000 librarians, many in New Jersey. I'm a trustee in Highland Park, and we are using community conversations through Harwood. And if you go on the ALA public program site, the original Libraries Transforming Communities project was the Turning Outward project, which is with in partnership with Harwood, and we continue to do trainings with Harwood. We
Yes,
meaning
and-
ALA, as well as many of us who work in libraries.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. It's good to hear your voice too. So I also just want to say that Nancy is a big proponent of this work and has been an advisor on LTC. And in addition to this grant that's on your screen now, there's also an annual grant that was provided in support, a large support by a very generous donation from Nancy Cronick for an annual Library Transforming Communities Engagement Grant. That grant opens up in December every year, and it provides $2,500 to up to 2 libraries.
And we've had some really interesting examples that you've pointed to. So our first project was working with deaf communities in Milwaukee, which was amazing. We've done a lot of work with diversity through these grants, and lots of other interesting topics, which are, I think, written up on the public program site somewhere. I know there's a link to them somewhere. So, and like you said, there's annual calls for people applying. And we're up to 2 now, which we're very excited about and hoping to keep growing, that we get more than 2 per year.
And that grant is actually open to any library type of any size. So that one's not restricted to only small and rural libraries like the LTC Accessible Small and Rural. So if you don't fit the small and rural community size, definitely keep an eye out for that grant opportunity, because that might be a good one.
Great, thank you both. And thank you, Nancy, for sharing too. I really appreciate that. So let me just say publicly, thank you, Courtney, Samantha, and Kaileen. I really appreciate you all being here. It's been so happy to have you. And I thank you again. If someone will stop the recording.